it was an invasion without an army, a conquest without a declaration of war. By the early 20th century, the Australian interior was being swallowed alive. We are not talking about a few overgrown fields. We are talking about 60 million acres of prime agricultural land, a territory larger than Great Britain vanished. Gone. In its place stood a suffocating green wall, the prickly pear cactus. It was a biological fortress of tangled spines that crushed fences, buried homesteads, and starved livestock. Farmers fought back with everything they had: fire, mechanical crushers, and military-grade poisons. But for every acre they reclaimed, the cactus took two more. Australia was losing. The heart of the continent was turning into a wasteland, until a team of desperate scientists decided to stop fighting the invasion with weapons and started fighting it with a monster of their own. To understand the catastrophe, you have to understand the greed that caused it. The disaster didn't begin with malice. It began with the desire for the color red. In the 18th century, red dye was power coloring everything from royal robes to military uniforms. This dye came from the cochineal insect, a tiny parasite that lived exclusively on the prickly pear cactus. For centuries, Spain held a monopoly on this red gold, making it their second most valuable export after silver. The British Empire wanted in, so when Captain Arthur Phillip's fleet arrived in Australia in 1788, they carried a biological payload: prickly pear plants infested with Brazilian cochineal insects. The plan was simple: establish a dye industry in the new colony and undercut the Spanish. But biology doesn't follow business plans. The cochineal insect's delicate and finicky died almost immediately in the harsh Australian climate. The cactus, however, thrived. For decades, the plant was a sleeper agent. It sat quietly in gardens and coastal hedges. But as settlers pushed west across the Great Dividing Range, they carried cuttings into the dry interior. They had unknowingly delivered the cactus to a paradise. No freezing winters, no specialized pathogens, and, crucially, no natural predators. By 1870, the sleeper agent had awakened. Two species, the common pest pewer and the spiny pest pewer, began to multiply with terrifying aggression. The spread was exponential. By 1919, the cactus was consuming the continent at a rate of 1 million acres per year. That's nearly 2,000 square miles every 12 months. For the farmers of Queensland and New South Wales, this was an existential nightmare. Government inspectors issued mandates: destroy the cactus or lose your land. But compliance was physically impossible. One Queensland farmer reportedly wrote to the Lands Department in despair: "I have watched my father's land disappear beneath the pear. There is nothing left to save. There is nothing left to fight for." He was not alone. Thousands of families abandoned their properties entirely, leaving behind everything their parents and grandparents had built. Those who stayed waged total war. They piled timber high and set the cactus fields ablaze. The fires raged for days, scorching the earth black. But the prickly pear is a survivor. Beneath the ash, the root systems remained alive. When the rains returned, the zombie plants re-emerged thicker than before. Desperation drove them to chemical warfare. By 1926, the Queensland Land Commission reported the sale of nearly 30,000 tins of Robert's improved P4 poison, enough to fill an entire freight train. It was a brutal mixture of 80% sulfuric acid and 20% arsenic pentoxide. Farmers spent months inhaling toxic fumes, poisoning the very soil they were trying to save. It was dangerous, expensive, and ultimately futile. Even mechanical destruction failed. When horse-drawn rollers crushed the plants, the scattered fragments would simply take root and clone themselves. The government offered a bounty: £10,000, equivalent to roughly $2 million today, for any solution. Inventors proposed everything from steam injectors to military flamethrowers. Nothing worked. The green wall kept moving. In 1920, facing the total loss of the eastern interior, the government formed the Commonwealth Prickly Pear Board. Their mandate was unprecedented: ignore the engineers and turn to the entomologists. If the cactus was unstoppable in Australia, why hadn't it taken over the world? A team of scientists, led by Alan P. Dodd, traveled to the Americas to find out. They discovered that in its native habitat, the prickly pear was just another plant. kept in check by a complex ecosystem of natural enemies. The solution wasn't poison, it was predation. But introducing a foreign insect is a game of Russian roulette. If the new species decided to eat wheat, cotton, or native flora, the cure would be worse than the disease. Australia had already learned this lesson the hard way with rabbits, with foxes, with the very cactus they were now trying to destroy. The team investigated over 150 insect species across North and South America. After years of painstaking research, one candidate emerged from Argentina, Cactoblastis cactorum, a moth with a singular, destructive purpose. The scientists imported 3,000 eggs, enough to fit in a single shoebox, to a quarantine facility in Chinchilla. The security was tighter than a bank vault. Every protocol was followed. Every precaution was taken. They ran starvation tests, offering the larvae every crop of economic importance in Australia: wheat, sugarcane, cotton, citrus, and dozens more. The caterpillars refused them all. They chose death over eating anything but prickly pear. They were the perfect biological weapon. In early 1926, the scientists began the first field releases. By 1927, millions of eggs were being distributed across the infested regions. The fate of a continent now rested on a caterpillar. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The caterpillars worked inside the plants, invisible to the naked eye. Months passed. Skeptics mocked the moth solution. Newspapers questioned whether the government had wasted years and resources on a fantasy. Farmers, still battling the advancing pear, grew impatient. But the scientists knew what was happening beneath the surface. The Cactoblastis larvae did not merely graze on the plants, they mined them. Working in coordinated swarms of up to 200 per pad, the caterpillars burrowed through the tough outer skin and devoured the soft, watery tissue from the inside out. They hollowed the cactus pads into rotting, papery shells. Bacterial infections followed, accelerating the collapse. By the end of the second year, entire stands of pear began to wilt and crumble. By the third year, the walls were falling. As the plants collapsed, the moths multiplied. Each generation spread further, faster. It was an exponential counter-invasion, nature reclaiming what had been stolen. By 1932, just 7 years after the first release, the impenetrable green walls had disintegrated. 60 million acres of land territory that had been written off as lost forever was returned to the people of Australia. Families who had abandoned their farms returned to find open land where jungles of spines had once stood. Cattle grazed again, crops were planted, communities rebuilt. It remains one of the most successful biological control operations in human history. The relief was so profound that the townsfolk of Bunarga did something extraordinary, something all-pernodhava. They built a monument, not to a general, not to a politician, to a bug. The Cactoblastis Memorial Hall stands to this day a shrine dedicated to a moth. In Dalby, a stone cairn records the indebtedness of the people to the insect that saved their livelihoods. Humanity had tried fire, poison, and brute force. In the end, a creature smaller than a fingernail had succeeded where all else had failed. But nature rarely offers a clean victory. The story did not end in the Australian outback. It traveled. Decades later, in 1957, the Cactoblastis moth was deliberately introduced to the Caribbean to control local cactus populations. It worked perhaps too well, but moths do not respect borders. Riding wind currents in cargo shipments, the species eventually reached the Florida Keys in 1989. From there, it spread westward into Texas and crept toward the Mexican border. But here, the prickly pear wasn't a pest. It was a native keystone species food and shelter for countless animals. It was also a vital agricultural crop. In Mexico alone, tens of thousands of farmers depend on cultivated cactus for their income. The pads are eaten as vegetables. The fruits are harvested for juice and candy. The plants are sacred in ways both economic and cultural. The savior of Australia became a potential scourge of North America. Today, the moth threatens commercial cactus farms and wild desert ecosystems that have existed for thousands of years. Scientists now work frantically to prevent its spread into the heart of Mexico, fighting against the very creature their predecessors had celebrated. The story of the prickly pear stands as a dual monument. In Australia, It is a testament to the brilliance of scientific intervention, a miracle that saved a continent when nothing else could. But beyond those shores, it is a stark warning. When we engineer solutions to nature's problems, we may solve the crises of today only to birth the catastrophes of tomorrow. Australia built a memorial hall to honor an insect. Mexico now sets traps to destroy that same creature. Same moth, same appetite, opposite verdicts. Where do you draw the line? Is the risk of biological control worth the reward, or should humanity leave the intricate balance of nature alone? There may be no right answer, but the question becomes more urgent with every passing year. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching.